Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, Perek Aleph, Halacha Hey, and beginning today, Perek Beis, Halacha Aleph. We're learning Daf Yud Aleph. We left off on Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, all the way on top of the Amud, and we're dedicating today's class Le'ilui Nishmas Yakir's father, Yosef ben Fraji of blessed memory. Today is his 17th Toiv yard site. Okay, so let's go. The Mishnah said that dried figs that are going to be called in the Mishnah groigeris because they're not fresh, they're not being made into that round cake, right? An eagle, it's just being dried out, and they used to beat them into a barrel. So the Mishnah says, when are they considered completely processed? When do they have their gemar malacha? Misha yadush. Indeed, when they were pressed into the barrel, we're going to begin learning about the groigeris. I just want to make mention that yesterday was Tu B'Shvat. We're in Tavshin Peivav, and from the Arizal's Lekutei Torah, it's amazing how many of the Shivas Haminim did we learn about yesterday. We'll learn a little bit about today, and he just makes the following correlation that chito, wheat, is some sort of manifestation of Hashem's attribute of Chesed. Barley is Gevura. Listen to this: grapes is Tiferes, figs is Netzach, pomegranate is Hoid. And olives, again, we learned yesterday about the olives is Yisoid, and dates is Malchus. How that works, I don't know, but that's the way it is. So we're learning about Netzach. We're learning about the figs. We're going to start learning about figs. Now, what we continue to have is the Gemara's comparing or differentiating between certain halachas, how they apply by Meiser versus how they apply in Hilchas Shabbos. The concept of muksa for Shabbos, which is the opposite of muchan for Shabbos. Muchan means something that was designated to be used for Shabbos. It doesn't mean that it was dafka designated for Shabbos, but let's say a chair. A chair was made to be sat upon. Since there is no issue with sitting on Shabbos, there's no prohibition, so the chair was b'derech mamela made for Shabbos use. Not exclusive, but for Shabbos use. The word muksa means it was separated. It was taken away for it being used for Shabbos. And as we mentioned, I think it was 2 or 3 shiurim ago, Dafka was speaking only about figs and grapes to the exclusion of other fruits that were dried. Figs and grapes, when they are left to be dried, during their process, they begin being edible. When they are finally properly dried, they are again edible. But in the in-between area, they are called muktzah, both for Hilchas Meiser and for Hilchas Shabbos, which means since they undergo a change, and that change is to the detriment of that moment. While they are drying out, they don't taste good, so people don't eat them. So both Hilchas Shabbos, they are muktzah, and also if your intention was to dry them out, there isn't a gemar malacha until when they are fully dried out. So it would sound that muksa vis-a-vis Hilchas Meiser, muksa means it's not a gemar malacha. Muksa, you can't have it on Shabbos, you can't even move it on Shabbos because it was actually set aside for it not to be consumed while it is in this state. It sounds similar, but the Gemara is going to point out that they are not going to be fully similar. That something that will be edible enough for it not to be muksa b'negei Shabbos still is not going to be chayv and maisres. You will still be allowed to snack from it because it did not yet undergo its final processing step known as its gemar malach. This is important. In the Mishnah, we had a machlekes between the Tanakama that will be identified as Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi concerning the people that were this barrel or the storeroom, and you're beating the figs into it. So what happens is you have different batches, really. So you put one batch into the barrel, but then normally you would fill the barrel up all the way to the top. And as we mentioned, l'chu'ura, the more you pack figs into the barrel, the more all of the figs, even the ones that are already there, will get better pressed because you're squeezing it all together, which is shitas Rabbi Yossi. And question is, what happens if the barrel breaks or some figs fall out? So Rabbi Yossi Taka says that you are allowed to eat the figs that were already in the barrel, because the gemar malach is only when it's packed. But the Tanakama, which we'll see is Rav Meir, doesn't agree with that. Tanakama holds that, yeah, you can argue that if you would pack more in, the ones that are already in would get even better squeezed. But still, the Gemar, once you put the figs into the barrel, those figs are Gemar Melachit. And there's going to be a real Hasidic oisius concerning the Gemara's explanation in the Machlokes Rab Meir and Rabbi Yossi, as we will see when we will learn the Gemara inside. This will conclude the first chapter. Second chapter will give continuity with the figs. And as we mentioned in the Perek Rishon, that when you are planning not to merchandise your produce, but when you are planning to take it home, its Gemar Malacha is Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. Now, we're going to right away bring in Demai. We learned the whole Masechtas Demai. We're going to speak out more details when we learn the Gemara inside. But the obligation of tithing produce that one purchases from or gets as a gift from a Am Ha'aretz is more lenient than Banafai Tevel. But still, we are choishish that some of the tithings were not properly done, and there are still some obligations to be done prior to which it's called Demai. As an example, just not example, we have to separate Trumas Meiser. So we have to separate Meiser Rishon to have from what to separate Trumas Meiser. The Meiser Rishon itself, you don't have to give to the Levi because it's only a financial law. The Am Ha'aretz maybe did give Meiser Rishon. He's saying he gave Meiser Rishon. But something that's already a chiyuv, a dinei isura, misa b'dei shomayim, even though he gives Truma Gedoyla. But maybe the Am Ha'aretz doesn't understand. Maybe the Am Ha'aretz thought that if he doesn't separate the Meiser Rishon, he doesn't have to worry about Trumas Meiser, but that's not the case. There is still Trumas Meiser in it. You have to separate Trumas Meiser, you have to separate Meiser Sheni and redeem it. But Meiser Ani, Hamayitzim Mechaveri, Olav Araya, well, we can repeat some of these details when we get inside. The second chapter is going to bring in Demai into this whole equation about Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. When you get produce from Am Ha'aretz, if it had Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, then it's more problematic. If it didn't have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, then it's going to be different. We'll see how that affects the dinam of Demai. And I think there's going to be two big novelties that we're going to learn in today's daf, and I want to say them out right now. Number one, the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis means, listen to this, if I own the produce and I bring it into my house, now that's its Gemar Malacha, hukvu'u lemaisris, and not I nor anyone else can even snack prior for the owner removing all of the tithing. But listen to this. What happens if I have my produce that was not tithed yet, but I am going to your house? And when I go into your house, there's 20 people there. And I walk into the house, and now that I'm in, when I walk, it's still mine, and I put it on the Fabrengen table, and I say, Chavre, it's for everyone. Was there the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis here? Why not? Because I'm the owner, the house is not mine. When I walked in there, I owned it. In other words, if the balabas is you, Rab Mendel, you're the balabas, and I gifted it to you before I walked into your house, then it is Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, for you, for everyone else. But if when it entered the home, it still belonged to someone else, the only person that cannot snack from it is the balabas of that house. Because it was Re'iyas his bias. All the other people get to say, there wasn't Re'iyas. The owner gifted it to them. When they'll take it to their home, then they won't even be allowed to casually snack. That's going to be a big, we'll repeat this. That's a biggie for me. That was wow. I don't remember this from the Rambam. Maybe the Rambam doesn't speak about this detail.
Well, you can gift something before it came to your house. How could you gift it? Not done.
In other words, Kevin, if you are having Pashat, you are having a gathering in your house. I want to take out the word Fabrengen for a reason. You are in your home, and many of our Chevra are with you. We're having this share in your house. And let's say I have a farm, I have figs. I want to gift to everyone some figs. And I walk into your house, I give you a little bit, and I give everyone else a little bit. That will be the case.
Not his house.
Yeah, not my house. I own the figs. I walked into your house. So you, Kevan, he won't be able to eat anything because there was Re'iyas Pnei Habayis only for him.
It's understood, sir.
I'm giving him, that's why, I'm giving everyone a little bit. That's why I'm giving everyone a little. So the other people, they got a gift. When they take it to their home, Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. Only the balabas can't. But how do you put it on the table? The balabas? I think if I put it on the table by a fabrengen, I think I'm really gifting it to the balabas. Elamai, the balabas will share. Once it's the balabas's, all of it, then everything has to be tithed. Okay. And the final, another big thing in the mission. This is only Rabbi Yehuda, but so what? Tana Rabbi Yehuda. That it's not stam ri'iyas pnei habayis. And by the way, ri'iyas pnei hachotzer that we had in the Rambam. The produce has to be brought into a place in the house or into a place in the chotzer that's private. What's the definition of privacy? Listen to these words. If some people don't identify, we have to fix ourselves. That's for sure. But also in this area, it's in the human nature, before we got corrupted, to have a certain amount of shame to eat in public. There's a certain amount of uncomfortability to eat in public. A dog eats in public. B'lashon Chazal.
Or discomfort.
Discomfort. So if my produce, I took it into my home, but to a location right by the entrance, where I never eat there, because everyone in the street sees in there, it didn't yet have Riyas Pnei Abayis. Riyas Pnei Abayis means the produce came into a place in my home where I will comfortably, I would have a su'udah there, I would eat or snack, which is not in the entrance in certain circumstances, and a lot more. These are two big dinim. Chavra Daf Yud Aleph, L'chaim, let's start learning. So the Mishnah spoke about the groigeris. It's interesting that going back to the Arizal, that since a fig is connected to Netzach, we're learning about a fresh fig, we're learning about a dried out fig, a rounded fig, like by Hoid. Hoid is Hoid. Humility is humility. But when it comes to Netzach, there are different types of Netzachs.
Maybe you could tell us about black figs and white figs. The black figs and the white figs.
I'm sorry, Danny, I can't hear.
I said we have black figs and white figs.
We have black figs and white figs. Very good. All of that. That means Netzach has many flavors. Even the Tzach and Gomer has many flavors. But the loss is the loss. That's simple. Okay. So Ugroigeris Mishiyadush. You press him into the barrel. Gemara begins with the story. Rabbi Omar, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, told one of his sons, Rab Shimon, Alevi Havi Lanu Groigeris Min HaChavis, go and bring us. Come bring some dried figs from the barrel. We're gonna clarify everything in a moment a little bit more. Well, what, who, what, when, and where, we don't know yet. So Rab Shimon tells his father, Amalei, ve'eino asa mishum muktzeh. Is it not asa because of muktzeh? Okay. Amalei, to which Rabbi replied, Va'adayin at lazu. Do you still need this information? In other words, I thought you already know the information which would have clarified your question. So I'll give it to you now. That ein lecha aser mishum muktzeh. When do we say that if something is left out to dry, as we explained, it undergoes this change, and while it's undergoing the change, it's not to be eaten because it's begashmias physically, it's not as fresh as, it's not as good as, or the lashon of the Gemara is, it becomes foul smelling while it undergoes the change. Only te'enim va'anavim bilvad, only figs and grapes. Now, how does that respond to the issue over here when the story was, we don't know yet what we're talking about. We're going to clarify. Is it Shabbos? Is it Meiser? What are we don't know yet. But 1 second. But it was about figs. It was about figs. Elamah, it was about figs that were in a barrel. That and on that, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Sisritai. Why is that? Mipnei shehi masrichos. Masrichos means it has a bad smell. Bein tayim. Okay. Until when they're completely dry. Once they're completely dry, they are completely edible. So what does it sound like Rebbe is telling his son? Since I spoke to you, I asked you to bring figs from the barrel. It's only put in the barrel when it's completely dry. That's the way it was. They wouldn't beat it in there if it wasn't fully dried. Now that it's fully dried, it's no longer muksa. Okay. Now, let's understand that we're speaking here about Shabbos. And indeed, while only these two items, Groigeris and Anavim, Tiferes and Netzach, while they are undergoing through a process, they become Masrichois, and therefore they may not be taken from on Shabbos. And we did have this a few daf ago. Now there's an exception we learned a few daf ago, that if a person purposefully, intentionally went before Shabbos and he declared that I will be taking on Shabbos some of these masrichos, that's okay, because you can't say it's not food. It's not as good as it was before. It's not as good as it will be later. Point is that it's only masrichos while it's undergoing the change. Once it's in the barrel, it's already not muktzah. So Rabbi tells his son, why are you questioning me whether there's a problem? Of course it's not a problem, because it's already in the barrel. Now, hold on. It doesn't make sense that the story was about split figs. In other words, if stam figs were in the barrel, why would the Rab Shimon even think it's muksa? That's what the Gemara is troubled with. Of course, he would have known that. Mistama, there was another deficiency to these figs. They were somehow split open. Split figs, we know this ourselves. They become more vulnerable. When you go to the market, you don't want a split fig. Mistama, the story was that there were split figs. So there was something that would make these figs less edible, which is why Rab Shimon asked his father, is it not muksa? Amalei, uf anosavar, and I also think that something else is missing in the story. How do I know that? Because Asa Rabbi Yossi Barabun, and he heard it directly from Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bisna, who heard it in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that also be Elaine Pitsulaya Hava Uvda, that the story, the figs that Rebbe asked the son to bring from the barrel on Shabbos, not only was it that it was dried out in the barrel, but they were split prior. They were split figs. And even there, Amalei, even by split figs, that's what the Rebbe told him, that Ein Lecha Asa Mishum Muksa Ela Te'enim Va'anavim Bilvad. And split figs that were not put out to dry, just because they were split, are not muksa. Okay, so now we already have this concept that a split fig is less edible, but still it's not a problem. It's not muksa. But anavim and groigeris, while they are drying, they become muksa for Shabbos and Yontif, because they went from being oichel from being muchan to muksa back to being muchan. And it's important, obviously, that they became fully dried before Ben Hashmashos, because of the rule that kivan di iskatzoi, or migo di iskatzoi le Ben Hashmashos, is katzoi for the whole day of Shabbos. So we have to make sure that they were edible before Shabbos began. Now, says the Gemara, now we're going to make a correlation or a differentiation between muksa for Shabbos and muksa in Hilchos Meiser. Rabbi Yaakov bar Zavdi, b'shem Rababo, Hadod the Tema, everything that we learned. Why did we bring this whole story? That was Dafke le'inyan Shabbos. Avo le'inyan Meisres. But when it comes to Meisres, even when the groigeris and the anavim are already dry enough that they will be considered muchan, it doesn't mean that they had their gemar malacha. It doesn't mean they had their gemar malacha. I'll give you the biggest raya. When do the anavim and the groigeris go away from being masrichos? When they're fully dried. They are fully dried before they are put in the barrel. What does our Mishnah say? When is the gemar malacha for groigeris? Misha yadush. Misha Yadush happens after the fully dry. It means even after the fully edible B'negeya Hilchei Shabbos, we don't say, "Oh, now that it's finished, now that you can eat it, b'meila it's tevel gomer." We don't say that. It doesn't go one and one together. Whenever there is an item that the owner is planning to do the final step, and the final step can only be packaging. Packaging doesn't affect the content. The content is the same. It's just the packaging. Doesn't matter. If I'm planning to package it, then prior to packaging, it's not yet Gemar Malachet. Even though, B'nei El Shabbos, it's a bona fide Muchan. Very good, very simple, very good. Aval inyan Meisres, Kol Hadvarim Yesh Lehem Muksa. Kol Hadvarim Yesh Lehem Muksa. Okay. Beautiful. Now, says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yoisa, Masnisa Amra Kain. I'll prove it to you from the Mishnah, like I just spoke out. Since the Mishnah says that if you're planning to put these dried figs in the barrel, when are they considered completed? Only when they're actually beaten into the barrel, or if you plan to put them in a megura in these storerooms, only Mishiya Agel, they would somehow smooth them out in the storage room, which means that prior to putting them in there, which is just packaging, they're not yet gemar malachid. That means you can have achilas arei. And for sure, it's not muksa. If it's completely dried, because it's completely edible, and even more than that, we just learned that the split figs that are even less than edible are still edible enough. In other words, the rules of Shabbos becoming muksa and the dinim over here of Meiser actually do not travel on the same track. Okay, next case in the Mishnah, in which we have a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yosi. So when you are packing these figs into the barrel, by the way, it's always both. I'm just going to mention the first, but it's the same thing. If you are smoothing them into the storeroom, but prior to filling up the entire room, prior to filling up the entire barrel, nishbera hachavius, the barrel broke, or vinifchasa, the storeroom became damaged. And another detail, Chevra, the Mishnah says, and the figs that were in there fell out. So the Tanakama, which is not the Chachamim, we'll see it's Rav Meir, consequential. The Tanakama says that since the figs were already in the barrel, they are Gemar Mulachid, they became Tevel, they're not going to revert back to the pre-Tevel state. You may not eat even a casual eating. However, Rabbi Yosi says, no. Rabbi Yosi says that prior to the barrel being fully packed in, there's no Gemar Malachi yet. So if something broke and they fell out, then you will be allowed to eat from that which fell out. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Divrei Shoyne Rishain. Shoyne Rishain, Shoyne Achron means the first opinion brought in the Mishnah, the first opinion learned in the Mishnah. In our Mishnah, there's no name. So normally it's called a Tanakama. It's very unusual. I don't remember. Shoyne Rishain. Instead of saying Rabbi Yosi, he calls them the Shoyne Achron. Divrei Shoyne Rishain. Listen to these words. Loy hatachtoin tzarech le'elyoin, v'loy ha'elyon tzarech le'tachtoin. In other words, why do the Chachamim, why does Rav Meir, why does the Tanakama say that even though the barrel wasn't full, whatever was in there is Gemar Malached? What went into the barrel first goes to the bottom of the barrel, just b'metzias. What goes in at the end, what closes the barrel, that which you put on top of the barrel. Just to know what the tachtin and what the elyon means. So even though to some degree, when you pack a barrel in, the more you pack in, it affects the pressing of all of the figs. You're right. Halachically, it's inconsequential. We don't view it that way. That's why we kept them, the maraful that we learned yesterday, they would beat it into the barrel. In other words, once it was beaten into the barrel, even though physically it might get even better pressed when you pack up the barrel. But we don't look at it that way. The tachtoin doesn't need the elyon. It's already gemar malachit. Whatever the final product you would like for it to be, it is. And the same thing in the other direction. In other words, we view every batch that's packed into the barrel is a batch for itself. Which is why the Tanakama says that if the barrel breaks and the figs fall out, you're not allowed to eat them. They went through Gemar Malacha. They were yadoshed into the barrel. The barrel wasn't full. Who cares? They didn't need the top layers. But Divrei Shoyna Achroin will be Rabbi Yosi. No. Hatachtoin tzarech le'elyon. V'loy ha'elyon tzarech le'tachtoin. As just a Hashgacha Pratis, we are beginning today the new cycle, the 46th cycle of the Rambam. And I know the Rebbe was the one who organized its chalukah. We don't begin with the first chapter of Hilchas Yesod Torah, but nevertheless, when you make a haskalah, the minig is most people that I saw, they begin reading from the first chapter, and this is mamash. These words, whether the tachton sarach le'elyon, elin v'loy ha'elyon sarach le'tachton, is the Yesod ha'Yesodus v'amud ha'chachmas. And just quoting, I wrote down the words of the Rambam. I don't know it by heart. The Rambam writes in Halacha Gimel that ve'im yalla haladas she'ein kol hanamtsoyim milvadoi mitzoyim. If you would allow it to go up in your mind, that what? That nothing will exist. If everything ceases to exist, says the Rambam, it doesn't affect at all God's existence. Hu levado yeh matzoi. God's matzoi is completely independent. Let's call God the Elyon. We're the Tachton. The Elyon doesn't need the Tachton. V'lo yevatel hu lebitulam. Nothing will be diminished in God. Why? I'm quoting the words of the Rambam. Shekol hanibtsoyim tzrichim loy. Everything that's created, the Tachton, need God. V'hu baruch hu eino tzarach lahem. But God does not need them. That's a statement that Rambam makes a point, both in the general. He doesn't need them. V'loy le'echad mehem. Doesn't need any single thing that he created. That's a yesod in our emunah, even though we don't understand God, but what the little that we could understand, this is a big rule in the Rambam from the Rebbe's Torah, that the Rambam in the beginning of a topic will define the mitzvah, and then there'll be a shenemar. Everything that's written before the pasuk is the definition of the mitzvah itself. Everything that the Rambam writes after the pasuk that he brings is a detail. It's a condition, it's a qualification. And I'm saying that because I think the pasuk that the Rambam brings is an halacha hey. That means this is the definition of our first mitzvah of knowing God, is to know these words, that the Elyon sarach letachton. God does not need the tachton. The tachton needs the Elyon. Coming back to the barrel, yes.
You could only have something at the top to squeeze in the bottom and to pack it in when you have bottom.
And therefore, the Elyon doesn't need to be squeezed and packed.
And then it becomes a top layer, and then it's not sweet, then it's not marmalade.
One more time.
If you don't have a bottom layer and you just have, then you don't have a top. The top becomes the bottom.
No, I'll tell you better. I'll tell you better. Because if you were to remove the tachton and you were to put the Elyon in the bottom of the barrel, so it's taka, according to Rabbi Yossi, that's the Gemar Malacha. Doesn't matter if it's on the top. Even if the top would be in the bottom, that's the whole word of Rabbi Yossi. Whatever you beat into the barrel has a Gemar Malacha. Whatever it was, that's the Tanakama. That's the Tanakama. Whatever you beat into the barrel has a Gemar Malacha. Rabbi Yossi holds that Rabbi Yossi holds that the pack, we need to pack the barrel up for everything to be a Gemar Malachet.
For it to be packed out, the Elyon needs the tachton.
If the barrel would have been smaller, that can be the other way around also. I get your point. Let me think. Yes.
Yeah, so I was like following up. So is it like the Tanakama holds that once the thing's just like in the barrel?
That's it.
Okay, and then for I think it was Rabbi Yossi, Yasa, it was
Yossi.
Yeah, Yossi, that it was. So for Rabbi Yossi, it's just that when it's like actually packed.
Exactly.
They fill it up.
Okay.
Yes.
Then
Now, if you remember, we had a few daf ago the Rabbi Lazar, right? The Talmud Chaver of Rabbi Yechanan was the master of these laws. So this is very consequential. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, I need for you to know that the Tanakam is not the Chachamim, that the Tanakam is Rabbi Meir. And why did he say that? Explains the Gemara. The law Tizbar, because these are the Klalim. You should not think that normally the rule is Meimar, Lo Tizbar. Don't think to say, whenever Rebbe did not tell you who the opinion is of, So that's called a Stam Mishnah. And even though Rabbi Yossi, Nemuka Yimoi, but whenever it's Rabbi Yossi against the Stam Mishnah, that's a klal. Right? Eruvin Memvav in Bavli. Stama of Rabbi Yossi, halacha kistama. And so when Abulazar said that the Tanakam is Rav Meir, because he wanted for us to know that the halacha is not like the Tanakam. The halacha is that the Elyon does not need the Tachton. Lefum kein sorach meimar the Rav Meiri. Because now we follow the rule that Rav Meir but Rabbi Yossi, halacha ke Rabbi Yossi. Tachton needs the Elyon does not need the Tachton. See, actually, my beard answers Rabbi Mendel's question, because I don't know the answer here, but when it comes to God, so it's a foolish conversation almost, and it's dangerous because it's misunderstood. There's no need for it. The fact that people are having this discussion, taka is a nice thing, very nice that people are thinking about God, but doesn't go beyond that. I think a lot more damage happened than good.
What's the purpose in the barrel? Is it to be compressed? Because obviously it's for the other.
Well, okay, so that's, in other words, in all of these arguments, no one is debating the Metzias. It gets more compressed. The question is, does that additional compression, is that needed halachically for you to have a Gemar Malacha? Because you can argue when it comes to any packaging. There has to be a limit. I'll give you a mashal. I had a retail store. So when you package, you put it in a package, but then you put it in a bag, and then you put a shmata in the bag, that paper. So what are you going to say? What's the packaging? What point is there has to be a point where even though you're going to enhance it, then you can put a bow. And if you didn't put the bow, there's no Gemar Malacha. No, that's a Tanakama saying, Tanakama Rameir is saying, you put it in the barrel, it's good. Okay. Hadran Allah Klal Omru, we're going to come back to you, Klal Omru, indeed. And let's start now with Hoya Oiver Bashuk. And second chapter, as we mentioned in the introduction, is going to right away bring into our conversation the laws of the Mai. During the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, the Chachamim made a takana that even though the majority of the people were properly separating all of the Trumos U'Maasros, but there was a significant enough minority that biblically we would not follow. We would not take into account. We take into account the majority. But rabbinically, since there was a significant amount of people that were not as knowledgeable as, and therefore they were more lax in the laws of Trumos U'Maasros, so the Chachamim made a takana that if you buy produce from someone who's classified as an Am Ha'aretz, you're not good to go. Even though the Am Ha'aretz is telling you, I separated all the Maasros, he's telling you his truth. In his mind or her mind, they did everything correctly. You go into someone's home and they tell you they have a kosher home. They're not lying. According to their knowledge, they have a kosher home, but still, maybe their home is not kosher. Same idea. And what do you have to do? You have to separate Meiser Rishon and separate from it Trumas Meiser to give it to the Kohen. The Meiser Rishon you get to keep. Even though there's a Machlokes Tanoim, whether there's Kedusha and Meiser Rishon, we paskin that Meiser Rishon is chulin, it's only the mamoina of the Levi or Kohen, and therefore when it comes to din the mamoina hamoitze mechaveri olav araya ein hoilchen b'mamin acher roiv, and here for sure roiv were properly toidim u'ma'ased everything. The same thing is with Meiser Sheni. You have to separate Meiser Sheni and either redeem it or eat it in Yerushalayim, because there's an isur of eating Meiser Sheni chutz mi Yerushalayim. Meiser Ani is again a din of the mamoina hamoitze mechaveri olav araya. In other words, really, what you end up taking off around 11%, right? You end up giving away 1% to the Kohen, Trumas Meiser, and another 10% of Meiser Sheni. Now, let's bring this back to the dinim that we are learning about, and that is that when is an item fully tevel, to the point that you may not even snack from it, if you are selling it when it's completely packaged. If you plan to take it home, even though it was fully packaged, it's only nigmar malachtoi. Let's use these words when you brought it into your home. Re'iyas penei habayis be'emes. It's also going to be re'iyas penei hachotzer. And there's a lot of nuance to that, as we're going to see, that if you brought it into your home, but it didn't enter the normal way, then biblically it won't be a gemar malachet. And people that were looking to circumvent their obligation of being toidim u'ma'ased, they would bring it into the skylight. They would bring it into a window. There's ways of going around it. There's going to be many details about Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. Now let's bring it into the dinim of the Mai. So the Mishnah says like this: Hoya Oiver Bashuk. Oiver is very important. Not the Amoritz has a stand in the market. Because if the Amoritz is selling his produce in the market, then the moment he packaged it in his field, he piled it in his field, it's Banafai Tevel. And even if he says, I already separated all the Trumas Umaisris, when you buy it, that's the din. You buy produce from an Amoritz, you're chayiv to separate the Demai separations. Oiver Bashuk means he's not a merchant. He is going home. It's just a story. He found you in the market. The same thing would have been if he found you on the street. That's the meaning. That if he's going, that means the fact that he's not yet home means that his produce never had the Re'iyas Pnei Habayis from the Amoritz. That means it was never Banafai Tevel. For Omar, and this Amoritz finds his Chavedim, and he's being generous, and he tells them, Tulu Lachem Te'enim. Everything is about figs. Okay. So now, we're talking about a small amount of figs. He's not selling to them. And even though we just mentioned in the intro that the Chazal spoke very negative words of people who eat a meal in the marketplace, this is not a meal. This is a person having a snack. It would be okay to have a snack in the marketplace. So the question is, can you have a snack from it? Yes, you could. You can have it and you have no obligation even to separate the demai separations. In other words, this is what we're going to say. That since we are, even if he didn't say so explicitly, when I find a farmer Amoritz in the marketplace with produce, I could assume that he did not yet bring his produce home. Because if he brought his produce home, why would he be walking with it in the marketplace? Why would he schlep his stuff? Since it did not have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, I'm going to make two presumptions. Number one, he did not separate anything yet because there was no obligation. On the other hand, since there wasn't yet Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, if he gave me a gift, if I brought it to my house, that's different. Now it has Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. If I'm still in the marketplace, there was no Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. For this, we say that Achilas Aray is mutter. Eating in the marketplace, no one ate Achilas Kva in the marketplace. We're speaking about Achilas Aray. So on one hand, yeah, you can eat it in the market without any concern. On the other hand, Lefikach, since, again, the whole heter is based on the presumption that it did not yet have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, that is a chumrah and a kula. You know why it's a kula? Because if there wasn't Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, you can have Achilas Aray. Why is it a chumrah? Because when it will have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, it's much worse than the mai. When it will have Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, then we have to say, the Amoritz didn't even separate Truma Gedoyla. If the recipients in our example of these figs brought it into their homes, so now Nigmar Amalachtin, Hukvu Ula Maisras, now Misaknin Vadai, now what has to be separated, not the Mai, Tabel Vadai, Truma Gedoyla, and you have to give it, Maisidishan, and you have to give it, etc., etc., etc. Now, if Tulu Vachnisu Lubatechem, if the Amoritz tells them, he tells them that even in the marketplace, but he tells them, oh, you can even take it and eat it in your homes. Why is he saying that? That statement means he is saying he was Toidem Ma'asir. And for that, the Chachamim say he has only partial Nemanas. Why would he say that he was Toidem Ma'asir? Why would he say that? We presume because it already entered his home. If it already entered his home, because we're saying that if it didn't have the hukv ula maisres, the am haaretz would not be toidem ma'aser b'shibalim. Why would he do that? Prior to the Gemara Malacha, we don't presume someone separated unless we know so. But it's the fact that he's telling you, you can have it, you can eat it, you can take it into your homes. So number one is that means that the am haaretz is basically saying, Nigmar Malachta, I already brought it to my house. And he's telling them, I did everything you need to do. For that, we have the takana. That what? That you're not allowed to fully rely on him. You have to separate the demai separations. But prior for your separating the demai separations, you may not even have arai. Why? Because him telling you, you can take it into your homes, it's as if he's telling you, I already brought it into my house. I was already chayv to be ma'asadet, and I was. Ooh, I don't believe that he was because of his ignorance. But I believe that he brought it into his home.
Even if you encountered him in the shuk.
Even though you encountered him in the shuk. The fact that he's telling you, you can take it home, he's learned enough to know that. So first of all, you can't even eat it in the marketplace. So I like what Yakir is saying. It's not the Amaretz halavai. We should be such an Amaretz. That's very great. And on the other hand, lefikach im echnisu lebotayim. But on the other hand, even if you brought it into your house, it's not tevel vadai. No, the guy is saying you can eat it. He has nemanus for the truma gedoyla. It ain't misachnen elodamai.
Do we treat them all the same, all Amahars?
We treat them all the same, and we learned that the only way you go from a Am Haaretz to a Chaver, it's not by learning more Mishnayos. It's by making a Kabbalah, in our slang, a Hachlata, in public. It's like a public commitment. Either to be Toidem or Ma'aser, you won't be called a Chaver yet. You'll have Namanas from Maisris, or the ideal to make a Kabbalah in public that you will both be meticulous in your tithing and in the laws of Tuma and Tara. Then you'll be called a Chaver. And then automatically, Eshes Chaver Kechaver, etc. Okay. Now, that comes another situation. So you have this group of people, and they are sitting, listen, a shar means the entryway of a yard. Another nuance, Re'iyas Penei Habayis doesn't have to be the physical house. If you have, the way many homes have here in LA, you have a lawn in the front, once it entered your chatzir, that's called Re'iyas Penei Habayis. With a nuance. So shar means there's a gateway to a courtyard. People are already in it, or someone is sitting in their store. This is both consequential. Re'iyas Penei Habayis can mean a store. If I own the store, especially in those days, even nowadays, go to every store, the balabas, the owner of the store, has in the back, he has his private quarters. He has his office. He eats lunch there. It's his home. But here, the nuance of the Mishnah is that we're not going into that yet. They're sitting in the courtyard. They're sitting in the retail part of the store. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not good enough. And now, V'omer da Amaretz walks in there. He sees his chaverim. How great. And he tells them, Tnu lechem te'elim. Go eat figs. So what would you think? If the store would belong to the Am Haaretz, this is the key. If the chatzar belongs to the Am Haaretz, he brought it in there before Rabbi Yehuda. Re'iyas Penei Habayis, tevel. And either if that was the first time, tevel vadai, or if he said he brought it home to first, whatever the first case of the Mishnah is, then there's going to be a problem. But vadai, you won't be allowed to eat from it achilasarai. Here the vart is that Re'iyas Penei Habayis is only effective if the owner brought it into his home. Here, the Am Haaretz owns another store. The Am Haaretz owns another home. He brought it into Reuven's store. And Ve'imai was Shimon and Levi and Yehuda. So it didn't enter the owner. One of the people there owned the store. So says the Mishnah that all of the other chevra can eat upturin, achilas arai, with the exception, this is gavaldik, ubal hashar and ubal hechanus, but the one person in there, Kevan, that was the owner of that store, the owner of the chatzir, that person is not allowed to eat. Why? Because the produce entered his home. And even though everyone else is sitting in his home, in his chatzir, in his store, doesn't matter. If he would have gifted it to the Baal HaChanus prior to entering the Chanus, then the new owner would take it into a store. Now it's tevel for everyone. But that's not what happened here. The gifter, who happened to be an Am Haaretz, walked into your store. So that's Chiddush number one. Chiddush number two is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda goes to another detail. Even though Rabbi Yehuda is mentioning in our Mishnah, this is regardless to this detail, that someone was gifting it. You Just because it entered the domain, that in itself is not the iyas panei habayis. The iyas panei habayis means it was brought into a part of your home where it's considered private, where the owner or others don't have shame to have a meal. Rabbi Yehuda says, Poiter, no one, even the Baal HaChanus, is allowed to have aray. It wasn't the iyas panei habayis because it was a shar. It was a gateway. It was a retail store. Retail store is public place, unfortunately. Everyone walks in there. Until either at least you face the other direction. When you face the other direction, you're more private because you're not facing the opening to the store. You're not facing the Reshus HaRabim. Or even better, look inside the Marafulda. We'll stop with that. 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, the last one in the Mishnah. In the place where he sells, who bush lechoil, a person has a natural shame by shonim. There's modesty. Beloy chazaras panim, without at least him turning his face. But if he would, even if he wouldn't turn his face, he would just go deeper into the store. If he would go into a location in the store where he doesn't sell from there, ain't a bush. The kaimalan makim shehu bush pater, makim she'ain a bush chayev. Gavaldik.
Or if one of these people owned a percentage of the produce, he's treated as an owner?
I don't know yet for sure. Yeah, it's going to be a Mishnah, this, and I know we learned this in the Rambam, so we knew it and we forgot it. In other words, if there's 2 owners and one of them brought it into his home,
Exactly.
does it affect the status for the other? Let's leave that open. We're gonna for sure learn this.